Hi.
My life with Sophia always seemed enviable from the outside. We had the suburban dream. A charming home, thriving careers, and the kind of chemistry that drew envious looks at dinner parties. Friends marveled at our connection. The way we could finish each other's sentences or share a knowing glance across a crowded room. For 10 years, our marriage was a testament to what others called relationship goals. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. First, I couldn't put my finger on it. It was subtle. A missed call here, a text she quickly swiped away there. Sophia had always been open. Her life an open book I could read without effort. Yet, recently, it felt as if she had started writing in a language I didn't understand. The first significant clue came on our anniversary. Sophia, who was always meticulous about planning surprises and celebrations, seemed distracted that day. The effort was there. A beautiful dinner, a thoughtful gift, but her attention wasn't. Her laugh felt rehearsed, her smiles fleeting. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the questions beginning to form. The second clue was harder to ignore. A misplaced jacket, expensive and clearly not mine, found its way into the back seat of her car. Sophia laughed it off, claiming it belonged to a colleague. Her explanation was plausible, but the knot in my stomach told a different story. I told myself not to overthink it. Relationships went through phases, didn't they? People drifted apart and found their way back. But that reassurance began to crumble when I discovered the key. It was a small, nondescript thing, silver, unremarkable, yet completely foreign to me. I found it in the pocket of a coat she rarely wore, tucked away as though it were meant to be forgotten. The weight of it in my palm was heavier than it should have been, my mind already racing with possibilities. I didn't confront her about it, at least not immediately. Instead, I decided to investigate. I tried every lock in our house and failed to find its match. It didn't belong to her office, her car, or anywhere else I could think of. The key became a symbol of my growing unease, a tangible representation of the doubts that had begun to consume me. Sophia's behavior only added fuel to the fire. She started coming home later, her excuses piling up like unread mail. Work projects, late meetings, gym sessions. She always had a reason, and each one felt more hollow than the last. Her phone, once left carelessly on countertops and tables, now seemed glued to her hand or hidden in her purse. I began to notice patterns, moments where her attention drifted or her laughter felt forced. She was there but not present, a ghost of the woman I had married. And always, in the back of my mind, was that key. The idea to follow her came during one of those restless nights where sleep felt impossible. I had spent hours staring at the key, its cold metal surface glinting in the moonlight, and decided that I couldn't live in the dark any longer. If Sophia wasn't going to give me answers, I would find them myself. Started small. I checked her phone when she left it unattended, but her passcode had changed. I scanned her social media for clues but found nothing out of the ordinary. Frustrated, I decided to take a more direct approach. The first night I followed her, my heart pounded so loudly I was certain she would hear it. She had left the house claiming to meet a friend for dinner, but her car didn't head toward the restaurant she mentioned. Instead, she drove to a neighborhood I didn't recognize, parking in front of an unfamiliar apartment building. She entered without hesitation, the key from her pocket likely granting her access. I waited in my car, anxiety gnawing at me as minutes turned into hours. When she finally emerged, her hair slightly disheveled and her expression unreadable, she returned to her car and drove home without noticing me. That night, I lay awake, the questions multiplying. Who lived in that apartment? What was Sophia doing there? And why did she feel the need to hide it from me? Determined to find answers, I returned to the apartment building the next day. I spent hours observing from a distance, hoping for a clue. The building itself was unremarkable. A plain brick structure with a modest entrance and a handful of cars parked outside. Finally, I saw him. A man, mid-30s, well-dressed, and undeniably confident, exited the building and drove away in a sleek black car. I felt a pang of recognition but couldn't place him. Had I seen him before? At one of Sophia's work events, perhaps? I decided to take a closer look. Approaching the building, I tried the key on the front entrance. To my surprise, it worked. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the air heavy with anticipation and dread. The interior was as unremarkable as the exterior, a bland hallway with numbered doors on either side. I found myself standing outside apartment 304. The door Sophia had disappeared into the night before. My hand hovered over the doorknob, the urge to knock battling with the fear of what I might find. In the end, I walked away, the unanswered questions trailing me like shadows. Over the next few weeks, Sophia's secrecy only deepened. Her phone was never out of sight, and her explanations for her whereabouts became increasingly implausible. I started to notice other changes too, subtle shifts in her routine that seemed designed to keep me at arm's length. Our conversations grew strained, the easy banter we once shared replaced by cautious exchanges that felt like walking on a tightrope. The man from the apartment building haunted my thoughts. His image played on a loop in my mind, a puzzle piece I couldn't place. I began to scour Sophia's social circles, looking for any mention of someone who matched his description. Every dead end only fueled my frustration, the feeling of being in the dark becoming almost unbearable. Finally, I decided to return to the apartment building. This time, I planned to be more proactive. Armed with the key and a growing sense of desperation, I entered the building once more. The hallway was as silent as before, the faint hum of distant conversations barely audible through the doors. Standing outside apartment 304, I pressed my ear to the door. The muffled sound of voices reached me, indistinct but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate, familiar. My hand tightened around the key, the temptation to open the door almost overpowering. But once again, fear held me back. I left the building feeling more conflicted than ever. The key, the man, the apartment, they were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't ignore. But with every step I took toward uncovering the truth, I felt myself drifting further from the life I had known. The illusion of our perfect marriage was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. The days after my second visit to the apartment building felt like trudging through quicksand. Every passing moment pulled me deeper into doubt and despair. Sophia moved through our shared life as if nothing was amiss, her routines seamless and her demeanor composed. But I knew better. The knowledge I carried, the key, the apartment, the man, transformed every glance, every smile, every touch into an interrogation. I couldn't help but wonder how much of it was genuine and how much was a carefully constructed facade. I needed answers, but the fear of what those answers might reveal paralyzed me. So, I did what many people in my position would do. I buried myself in the minutiae of our life, hoping that distraction would dull the edges of my unease. But the cracks were widening, and no amount of avoidance could hold them together. One evening, while Sophia was out for yet another late meeting, I decided to organize the shoeboxes of photos we had accumulated over the years. I told myself it was just a way to kill time, to remind myself of happier moments. But as I sifted through the memories, one photo stopped me cold. It was from a company holiday party 2 years ago. Sophia stood in the foreground, her laugh caught mid-motion as she raised a glass. In the background, almost obscured by the crowd, was the man from the apartment building. He was leaning against a wall, a drink in hand, his gaze unmistakably fixed on Sophia. The photo sent a chill through me. This wasn't a coincidence. Their connection ran deeper than I had feared, predating whatever arrangement they currently shared. My hands trembled as I stared at the image, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. The man wasn't just a stranger. He was someone Sophia had allowed into her orbit long before I suspected anything was wrong. Fueled by the revelation, I decided to dig deeper into the man's identity. I scoured social media, old event invitations, and anything else that might offer a clue. After hours of searching, I found his name, Nathan. He was a marketing consultant, someone Sophia's company had hired on a temporary basis during a major project. Nathan's online presence painted a picture of success and charisma. His profiles were filled with photos of exotic vacations, high-profile events, and a seemingly endless stream of accolades. But there was little about his personal life. No mentions of family, no close connections, just a carefully curated image of a man in control. I wondered how their relationship had begun. Was it professional at first, gradually evolving into something more? Or had it always been an affair, hidden behind the guise of work? The questions clawed at me, each one more unsettling than the last. I decided to confront Sophia, though I knew I had to tread carefully. She was adept at deflection. Her intelligence and quick wit often disarming me before I could gather my thoughts. This time, I resolved to stay focused, to demand answers she couldn't sidestep. When she returned home that evening, I asked about Nathan directly. Her reaction was immediate and telling. A flicker of recognition crossed her face before she masked it with confusion. She claimed he was just a former colleague, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. But her words felt rehearsed, her tone too casual to be genuine. I pressed further, mentioning the photo from the holiday party. Her response was defensive, accusing me of being paranoid and overanalyzing harmless interactions. She reminded me of how easily jealousy could distort reality, painting herself as the victim of my insecurities. But the cracks in her story were obvious, and the more she tried to cover them, the wider they grew. That night, as Sophia slept beside me, I made a decision. I couldn't let her explanations, or lack thereof, placate me any longer. The key in my possession, the photo of Nathan, and Sophia's increasingly implausible excuses were all pieces of a puzzle I could no longer ignore. It was time to take more decisive action. The following day, I took a leave of absence from work. I needed time to investigate without distraction, to follow the threads wherever they might lead. My first stop was the apartment building. This time, I wasn't content to linger in the shadows. I approached the landlord, posing as someone interested in renting a unit. My fabricated story was simple but convincing. I had seen the building online and wanted to know if any apartments were available. The landlord, a genial older man, was happy to oblige. As he gave me a tour, I casually steered the conversation toward the residence. Most were long-term tenants, he explained, but a few units were rented on shorter leases. Apartment 304, he mentioned, was one such case. The current tenant was a private individual who traveled frequently and kept to himself. I filed away the information, my mind racing with possibilities. Nathan's frequent travel, his polished image, and the secrecy surrounding his life all pointed to someone adept at compartmentalizing. But what role did Sophia play in his world? Was she just another piece of his carefully managed existence, or was there more to their connection? As I dug deeper, I realized I couldn't do this alone. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable, and I needed someone to confide in. I turned to my best friend, Eric, who had known Sophia and me since college. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and anger, his loyalty to me evident in every word he spoke. Eric offered to help, suggesting we approach the situation methodically. He had a background in tech and proposed using his skills to uncover more about Nathan and his connection to Sophia. Reluctantly, I agreed. While part of me felt guilty for involving someone else in my private turmoil, another part knew I couldn't face this alone. Over the next few weeks, Eric and I worked together to piece together the puzzle. He accessed public records, social media accounts, and professional databases, compiling a dossier on Nathan that was both comprehensive and damning. What we found confirmed my worst fears. Nathan had a history of entanglements with colleagues, his charm and influence often leaving chaos in their wake. Just as I thought I had uncovered the full extent of the betrayal, a new piece of information came to light. Among Nathan's connections was a woman named Rachel, whose name appeared in several emails and messages we uncovered. Rachel, it seemed, was more than just a passing acquaintance. She was listed as a co-tenant on the lease for apartment 304. The discovery shook me to my core. Sophia wasn't just involved with Nathan. She was part of a larger web of deception. Who was Rachel, and what role did she play in this tangled mess? The questions multiplied, each one more disconcerting than the last. As I stared at the evidence, a sense of dread settled over me. The illusion of control I had clung to was slipping away, replaced by the realization that I was only beginning to scratch the surface of a much darker truth. The revelation of Rachel's connection to Nathan and apartment 304 unraveled what little composure I had left. My suspicions about Sophia had grown into something far more insidious. Her betrayal wasn't confined to a simple affair. It was part of a complex web involving multiple players, each layer darker and more twisted than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stumbling blindly into something far bigger than I had imagined. Eric, ever the pragmatist, suggested we return to the apartment building, this time with a plan to observe and gather more information. We spent a Saturday parked inconspicuously across the street, armed with cameras and a notebook to document any activity. The day passed slowly, the monotony broken only by the occasional resident entering or exiting the building. Late in the afternoon, our patience was rewarded. A car pulled up to the curb, sleek and unmistakable. Nathan's black sedan. He stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, and disappeared into the building. Less than 15 minutes later, another figure arrived. It was Rachel. She moved with a sense of purpose, her sharp features and confident stride leaving no doubt that she was no mere bystander in this drama. The two spent hours inside the apartment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eric and I debated our next move. Should we confront them? Call Sophia? My heart raced at the thought, but my mind urged caution. Acting impulsively could ruin any chance of uncovering the full truth. We decided to wait. When Nathan and Rachel finally emerged, they appeared relaxed, even jovial. They exchanged a few words before parting ways, each heading to their respective cars. Watching them drive off, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The evidence was mounting, but the answers still felt out of reach. Over the next few days, I observed Sophia more closely than ever. Her routines, once predictable, had grown erratic. She came home later than usual, her excuses increasingly implausible. Her phone, always within reach, became an extension of her hand. The more she tried to act normal, the more obvious it became that she was hiding something. One evening, I caught her in a rare moment of distraction. Her phone buzzed with a notification, and she swiped at the screen without realizing I was watching. For a split second, I glimpsed the name, Rachel. The sight sent a jolt through me. Sophia quickly locked her phone and tucked it into her pocket, oblivious to the fact that I had seen enough to confirm my fears. Rachel wasn't just connected to Nathan. She was tied to Sophia as well. The discovery shifted the narrative in my mind. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy, and Sophia was deeply entrenched. Eric's tech skills proved invaluable once again. Using his expertise, he managed to access public records and online correspondence that shed light on Rachel's background. She was a financial consultant with a reputation for working discreetly with high-net-worth clients. Her name appeared in several business filings, often alongside Nathan's, suggesting a professional partnership that extended beyond their personal connection. But the most damning discovery came from an obscure legal document Eric uncovered. It detailed the formation of a shell company, with both Nathan and Rachel listed as co-founders. The company's purpose was vague, its transactions cloaked in anonymity. However, one name stood out among the listed clients: Sophia's. She wasn't just involved with Nathan and Rachel on a personal level. She was a client, potentially complicit in whatever scheme they were running. The realization left me reeling. Sophia, the woman I had trusted with my life, was entangled in something far more nefarious than infidelity. My mind raced with questions. What was the nature of this shell company? What role did Sophia play in its operations? And most importantly, why had she kept it hidden from me? Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I confronted Sophia with the evidence Eric and I had gathered. Her initial reaction was one of shock, her composure faltering as I laid out the facts. She denied any wrongdoing, insisting that her involvement with Nathan and Rachel was purely professional. But her protests rang hollow, her deflections failing to explain the inconsistencies in her story. As the confrontation escalated, Sophia's mask began to slip. Her denials gave way to defensiveness, then anger, and finally silence. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, now felt like a stranger. The cracks in our marriage, once hidden beneath the surface, had widened into an irreparable chasm. With Sophia unwilling to provide clarity, I turned my attention back to Nathan and Rachel. Their partnership, both personal and professional, held the key to understanding the full scope of what was happening. Eric and I continued to dig, piecing together fragments of information that painted an increasingly damning picture. The shell company we discovered was involved in money laundering, its accounts used to funnel illicit funds through legitimate channels. Nathan and Rachel's roles were clear. He provided the charm and connections, while she handled the financial logistics. But Sophia's involvement remained murky. Was she a willing participant, or had she been coerced into their scheme? The line between victim and accomplice blurred with every new piece of evidence. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront Nathan directly. It was a risky move, one that could backfire if handled poorly. I arranged to meet him at a bar he frequented, presenting myself as someone interested in his consulting services. The ruse worked, and we struck up a conversation over drinks. Nathan was every bit as charming as I had imagined, his confidence bordering on arrogance. I probed carefully, steering the conversation toward his business ventures. He spoke in vague terms, his words carefully chosen to reveal little. But beneath his polished exterior, I sensed a flicker of unease. He knew I was digging, even if he couldn't be sure of how much I knew. When I finally mentioned Sophia's name, his reaction was subtle but telling. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly masked by a neutral expression. He brushed off my inquiries, claiming their interactions were strictly professional. But his body language betrayed him, the tension in his posture speaking volumes. The encounter with Nathan left me with more questions than answers. His deflections only deepened my resolve to uncover the truth, even as the risks grew greater. Sophia's involvement in his and Rachel's world had ensnared me in a web of deceit, one that threatened to consume everything I held dear. As I drove home that night, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The truth was out there, but reaching it would require sacrifices I wasn't sure I was prepared to make. The cracks in my life had widened into a gaping void, and the only way forward was through the darkness. The meeting with Nathan left me unnerved, but it also fueled my determination. I could no longer cling to the hope that this was a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse on Sophia's part. The tangled connections between her, Nathan, and Rachel pointed to something deliberate, calculated, and far-reaching. Whatever the truth was, it demanded to be uncovered, no matter the cost. Back at home, Sophia's demeanor continued to shift. She was more distant than ever, her once effortless charm replaced by an almost palpable tension. It wasn't just guilt I sensed. It was fear. She seemed to be carrying a weight she couldn't put down, her eyes darting away whenever I tried to meet them. Her nervous energy infected the atmosphere of our home, turning even mundane interactions into fraught exchanges. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, her phone buzzed incessantly. She ignored it, but the frequency of the notifications betrayed their importance. I could see the name Rachel flash on the screen before Sophia hurriedly flipped it over, her face a mask of forced composure. The tension between us was suffocating, the unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to confront her then and there, to lay everything out and demand the truth. But I held back. Sophia's reaction to Nathan's name had already shown me how adept she was at deflection. If I wanted real answers, I needed leverage. Eric and I redoubled our efforts, focusing on the financial aspects of the shell company. We discovered a trail of transactions that painted a clearer picture of its operations. Large sums of money moved between accounts, the origins obscured by layers of intermediaries. Some of the payments were linked to contracts with legitimate businesses, but others had no discernible purpose. It was a textbook case of money laundering, with Nathan and Rachel at the center of it all. But then came the shock. Sophia's name appeared in several transactions. She wasn't just a client. She was listed as a partner in multiple agreements. Her signature was on documents authorizing payments, her email address used to correspond with other involved parties. The evidence was damning, far more incriminating than I had expected. I stared at the documents in disbelief, the weight of betrayal crushing. Sophia wasn't just complicit in their scheme. She was an active participant. The woman I had shared my life with, trusted implicitly, was deeply entrenched in a criminal enterprise. The revelation shattered any lingering hope I had of salvaging our relationship. Armed with this new evidence, I confronted Sophia once more. This time, there was no room for evasion. I laid out the financial documents, highlighting her involvement in the transactions. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She denied everything at first, her voice trembling as she scrambled for an explanation. But as I pressed her, her facade crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to knowing about the shell company and its operations. She claimed she had been coerced into participating, her initial involvement born out of fear rather than greed. According to her, Nathan and Rachel had threatened her career and reputation, leveraging her vulnerabilities to draw her into their scheme. Her story was plausible, but it did little to ease my anger. Whether she had been a willing participant or a reluctant one, the fact remained. She had lied to me, repeatedly and deliberately. The person I had once seen as my partner and confidant was now a stranger, her actions undermining everything we had built together. As Sophia's confession unfolded, she revealed a new layer to the conspiracy. Nathan and Rachel's operations extended beyond money laundering. They had ties to powerful individuals, their network spanning industries and borders. Sophia claimed she had overheard conversations about bribery, blackmail, and even violence used to protect their interests. She painted a picture of a dangerous organization, one that would stop at nothing to maintain its secrecy. Her fear, once an abstract concept, became tangible as she described the lengths Nathan and Rachel were willing to go to. She admitted to feeling trapped, unable to extricate herself without risking everything. Her tears, her trembling hands, her desperate pleas for understanding. They all pointed to someone in over their head. Despite my anger, I couldn't ignore the gravity of her situation. Sophia wasn't just my wife. She was a potential whistleblower in a web of crime far larger than I had imagined. The implications were staggering, the risks daunting. I knew that exposing Nathan and Rachel would come at a cost, but the alternative, allowing them to continue unchecked, was unthinkable. Eric and I devised a plan to gather more evidence, this time with the intention of involving law enforcement. Sophia reluctantly agreed to help, providing details about the shell company's operations and Nathan's network. Her cooperation was reluctant and fraught with tension, her fear evident in every interaction. She was terrified of the consequences, both for herself and for us. Our plan hinged on accessing Nathan's apartment, which we suspected held critical information. Sophia claimed to have a spare key, a relic from her time working with him. The idea of entering his space filled me with dread, but the potential payoff outweighed the risks. If we could secure irrefutable evidence, we might have a chance at dismantling their operation. The night we chose to act was fraught with tension. Eric and I waited in the car as Sophia entered the building, her steps hesitant but determined. She emerged moments later with a laptop and a stack of documents, her face pale and drawn. We left immediately, the weight of our actions pressing down on us. The data on Nathan's laptop was explosive. It contained detailed records of transactions, communications with high-profile individuals, and even video recordings of meetings where illegal activities were discussed. The evidence was overwhelming, enough to implicate not only Nathan and Rachel but several others in their network. But the fallout came swiftly. Nathan discovered the theft within hours, his fury evident in the barrage of calls and messages Sophia received. He demanded the return of the laptop, threatening dire consequences if we refused. His threats escalated, his language turning from anger to veiled violence. It was clear we were dealing with someone dangerous, someone who wouldn't hesitate to protect his interests. Despite the danger, we turned the evidence over to law enforcement. The investigation that followed was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. The authorities moved quickly, raiding Nathan's apartment and freezing the shell company's accounts. But the operation was far from over. Nathan and Rachel's connections ran deep, and their network wasn't dismantled overnight. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and personal reckoning. Sophia's cooperation with law enforcement earned her some leniency, but it came at a price. Our marriage, already strained to the breaking point, couldn't survive the weight of what had happened. We separated, the trust between us irrevocably broken. As for Nathan and Rachel, their empire began to crumble under the weight of the investigation. They were charged with multiple crimes, their once polished reputations reduced to infamy. But the fallout extended beyond them, ensnaring others in their network and exposing the systemic corruption that had allowed them to operate for so long. Through it all, I grappled with the question of what might have been. Could I have prevented this? Was there a moment when I could have seen the truth and acted differently? The answers eluded me, lost in the chaos of a life appended. The fallout from the investigation shook my world to its core. What began as suspicions of infidelity had spiraled into a labyrinth of crime, betrayal, and shattered trust. Sophia and I were no longer the same people we had been when this began, and neither was our relationship. As the weeks turned into months, the pieces of my life began to reassemble themselves, though the final picture was far from what I had imagined. After Sophia's cooperation with law enforcement, she moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town. The separation was both a necessity and a relief. Our conversations, when they happened, were polite but strained, focused mainly on practical matters. Despite everything, part of me still cared for her, though I couldn't bring myself to forgive her entirely. Eric remained a constant source of support. His insights and determination had been invaluable throughout the ordeal, and our friendship deepened as a result. He often reminded me that uncovering the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living a lie. I clung to that belief even as I struggled to rebuild my life. Nathan and Rachel's empire, once so untouchable, was now in ruins. Their arrests made headlines, their assets seized, and their connections exposed. The investigation revealed the breadth of their operations, implicating several high-profile individuals who had aided or benefited from their schemes. Watching it unfold was both satisfying and surreal, like seeing the villainous climax of a movie play out in real life. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Sophia began attending therapy. She shared snippets of her sessions with me during our occasional phone calls, her voice tinged with a mix of regret and hope. She admitted to being blinded by ambition and fear, her choices driven by a desperate need to protect herself and our life together. Her words felt genuine, but they couldn't undo the damage. Her turning point came during the trial. Sophia's testimony was a key component of the prosecution's case. She detailed her involvement, acknowledging her mistakes and shedding light on Nathan and Rachel's methods. Watching her on the stand, I saw a woman grappling with her past, determined to make amends. It didn't absolve her, but it was a step toward redemption. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, there was a knock at my door. To my surprise, it was Rachel. She was out on bail, her once impeccable appearance replaced by a worn and desperate demeanor. My instinct was to shut the door, but her expression stopped me. There was no arrogance, no manipulation, just a plea for a moment of my time. Rachel's visit turned out to be a revelation. She claimed she had come to clear the air, to share information she believed I deserved to know. According to her, Sophia's involvement in the scheme had been far more reluctant than I had realized. Nathan had targeted her specifically, exploiting her vulnerabilities and manipulating her into compliance. Rachel's own role, she admitted, had been far more complicit. Her confession was laced with bitterness, a mix of regret and self-preservation. What struck me most was Rachel's claim that Nathan's interest in Sophia wasn't just professional. He had been drawn to her, obsessed even, and had used their business dealings as a way to keep her within his orbit. The realization made my stomach churn. Sophia had been both a victim and an accomplice, her autonomy eroded by Nathan's control. Rachel's visit forced me to re-examine everything I thought I knew. Her account, coupled with Sophia's testimony and the evidence from the investigation, painted a picture that was both more complex and more tragic than I had imagined. Sophia's betrayal was real, but so was her suffering. She had been caught in a web she couldn't escape, her choices shaped by forces beyond her control. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on the nature of forgiveness. Could I truly forgive Sophia? Could I forgive myself for the anger and resentment I had harbored? The answers didn't come easily, but the process of seeking them brought a sense of clarity. One evening, as I sorted through the last remnants of our shared life, I came across a box of letters Sophia had written during the investigation. Most were unsent, their pages filled with apologies, explanations, and confessions. Reading them was like seeing a side of her I had forgotten existed. A woman who, despite her flaws, had loved deeply and fought to protect what mattered to her. Sophia and I met one final time to discuss the future. The trial was over, the sentencing complete, and the chapter of our lives involving Nathan and Rachel had finally closed. Sitting across from her, I saw someone who had been broken and rebuilt, someone who had faced her demons and emerged stronger. We agreed to part ways amicably. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grand gestures, just two people acknowledging their shared past and choosing to move forward separately. It wasn't the ending I had once envisioned, but it was one I could accept. As Sophia left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was the key that had started it all, its silver surface glinting in the light. She told me to keep it as a reminder, not of the pain but of the lessons we had learned. I held it in my hand, the weight of it no longer heavy but symbolic of a journey that had changed me forever. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild. The experience had left scars, but it had also given me a newfound sense of resilience. I poured myself into work, hobbies, and friendships, rediscovering parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the chaos. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was determined to make the most of it. As for Sophia, she continued her journey of healing. We stayed in touch sporadically, our conversations light and cordial. She found a new job, one far removed from the shadows of her past, and seemed to be carving out a life of her own. I wished her well, genuinely hoping she would find the peace she deserved. The truth, as painful and messy as it had been, had set us both free. It had exposed the cracks in our foundation, forcing us to confront the reality of who we were and what we had become. And in that confrontation, we found the strength to let go.
How was the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Leave your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.